I've been section hiking the Appalachian Trail for 6 years. Not all at once. I do it in pieces. A week here, 4 days there, whatever I can pull away from work. By last September, I had close to 800 miles behind me, and I considered myself a competent backcountry person. Not a survivalist, not an expert, but someone who had spent enough nights alone in serious terrain to know the difference between sounds that were nothing and sounds that were something. I did a 4-day section in southwestern Virginia last fall. Remote stretch, Jefferson National Forest, not one of the popular sections. No shelters, minimal foot traffic that time of year. I planned it that way. I like the empty sections. I like being alone in the woods. First day was perfect. 8 miles, good weather, set up camp near a ridge, had food and was in my tent by 8 p.m. Solo hiking does that. It gets dark and there's nothing to do but sleep. I was out within 10 minutes. Second day started fine. I was 2 miles into the morning when I noticed the footsteps. Not immediately. It took a while to register. At some point, I became aware of a sound behind me on the trail. The rhythm of steps on leaf cover, roughly matching my pace. I assumed another hiker. I slowed to let them pass. The footsteps slowed. I stopped to check my map, and the footsteps stopped about 5 seconds after I did. I turned around. Empty trail, curving away into the trees. I stood there for a full minute. Nothing. Started walking again, and within 30 seconds the footsteps were back. I tried to catch it, stopped suddenly, spun around. Empty trail. I told myself it was an echo. Some terrain does that, sound bouncing off a ridgeline. I kept going. That night I was in my tent by 7:30, a mile off the main trail on a flat section near a dry creek bed. 8, got into my bag, started reading. That's when I heard it. Footsteps on the leaf cover around the tent. Moving slowly. Not in a circle exactly, more like something walking a perimeter, taking its time, getting a sense of the space. I lay completely still. The sound stopped. Then, after maybe 3 minutes of silence, something pressed against the outside of the tent. Just briefly, a pressure against the fabric, like a hand or a weight leaning in. It held for 2 seconds and then released. I did not move. I had a knife in my sleeping bag and my hand was on it, and I lay there for what felt like hours. The footsteps moved away gradually. At some point, I fell asleep from pure exhaustion. In the morning, I got out and looked at the ground around the tent. The leaf cover had been disturbed in a rough ring. Not footprints exactly, but dragging, like something circling without quite lifting its feet. On the side where the pressure had been, the mud at the edge of the flat ground had an impression. Large. Too wide for a human hand. Too symmetrical for a bear paw. 4 marks, but the spacing was wrong for anything I knew how to identify. I packed the tent in 8 minutes, was back on the main trail in 20. I went through every explanation on the walkout. Bear. Possible. But bears don't walk deliberate perimeters and the impression wasn't right. Another hiker. The behavior made no sense for a person. An animal I didn't recognize. I'd been in serious backcountry dozens of times and had never heard anything move like that. That patiently. That quietly. I came out at the trailhead on day 3 instead of day 4. Drove to the nearest town, found a diner, sat in a booth over coffee for a long time. The woman behind the counter looked at me and asked if I was okay. I told her where I'd been. She got a look on her face, not surprised, just something shifting behind the eyes, and she said, "People don't really hike that section anymore." I asked her why. She refilled my coffee and moved to another table. She didn't say she didn't know. She didn't say she'd never heard of anything happening up there. She just didn't answer. And in the small towns of the Appalachians, especially the ones that have been there a long time, that non-answer is its own kind of answer. I've done 2 other AT sections since. Different states, no issues. I still go out, I still sleep in tents. I'm fine in the woods. But I haven't gone back to that section of Virginia, and I won't. Not because I'm certain something will happen again, but because I've never found an explanation for what did happen, and the absence of an explanation is worse than anything I could have seen. The footsteps that matched my pace, second for second. The pressure on the tent fabric. The impression in the mud that wasn't a hand and wasn't a paw. And the woman at the diner who knew exactly where I'd been just from the look on my face and decided not to tell me what she knew. Whatever is on that ridge, it's been there long enough that locals stopped going. Long enough that the knowledge traveled without anyone writing it down. Long enough that a woman at a diner can read it on a stranger's face within 30 seconds. I don't need a name for it. I just need to stay a long way from that section of the trail. So far, that's been enough. I've been hunting since I was 12. My father taught me. His father taught him. It's just part of how I was raised, and at this point it's one of the only things that gets me properly out of my head. Every November I go out for whitetail, and every few years I make the trip down to eastern Kentucky where a college buddy has family land. Hundreds of acres of Appalachian hardwood at elevation, no posted land, no roads past the first half mile. Good deer habitat, better solitude. Last November my buddy canceled at the last minute. Family thing, couldn't be helped. But the land was still available and I went anyway. Solo, which I'd done before. Set up a tent camp about a mile and a half in, had a fixed stand in a good funnel 400 yards from camp. 4 days was the plan. The first 2 days felt quiet in a way that registered. Not good hunting quiet. Good hunting quiet has a rhythm to it. The woods settle in a particular way and everything moves correctly. This was different. Too still. Few birds. The deer I did see were moving fast, heads up, not browsing. On the second afternoon, a group of does came through the funnel like they were being pushed by something behind them. I watched them clear the tree line and looked back at where they'd come from for a long time. Nothing there, but the absence of sound where there should have been sound. Third morning, I was in the stand at 5 a.m., full dark. Fog had come in overnight. Thick, low, the kind that turns a headlamp beam into a wall. I had my rifle across my knees and I was waiting for light. Around 6 a.m. the fog started to gray. Visibility maybe 30 yards. At 6:20 something moved at the edge of that visibility. I want to be careful how I say this because I am an experienced hunter and I know what deer look like in low light and fog. I know what large dogs look like. I know what other hunters moving through timber look like. What I saw was none of those things. It was large, moving between the trees slowly. Not the bounding movement of a spooked deer, and not the methodical pace of a person on foot. Something in between, deliberate, low, like something that knew the fog was there and was using it. I had my rifle up within 2 seconds. I had my scope on the tree line. Nothing there, just fog and timber. I stayed in that stand for 40 minutes without moving. Nothing came back. When the fog burned off, I could see 100 yards in every direction, and the woods were empty. I climbed down and broke camp in under an hour. On the logging road out, I stopped at the first gas station I hit. Small place, 1 pump. A hunting license sign in the window that had been there since the 80s. Old man behind the counter. Flannel, white beard, looked at me the way people look at you when they can already tell. He asked where I'd been hunting. I described the general area, the ridge, the elevation, the hollow where I'd set up. He nodded. Then he asked, "How far past the creek did you go?" I told him. About a mile past the main creek up toward the second ridge. He was quiet for a moment. Said, "That's a ways up." I asked if he'd ever heard of trouble up that way. He looked at me for a long time. He said, "Some of the old families around here don't hunt that ridge anymore. Haven't for a long time." I asked why. He put my coffee on the counter. He said, "I couldn't tell you what it is, but I can tell you it's been there longer than any of us." That was it. I pushed a little, not rudely, just asking, and he shook his head slowly. like I was asking him to explain something that didn't have words. I've thought about that conversation more than I've thought about the thing in the fog. Because the thing in the fog I can almost rationalize. Poor visibility, unfamiliar terrain, an animal I didn't get a clear look at. I've made those explanations work, barely. But the old man knew before I said a word about what I'd seen. He read the look on my face and knew, the way you know a story you've heard before. Something has been on that ridge long enough that people stopped hunting it. Long enough that the knowledge got passed down without anyone writing it down or saying it plainly. Long enough that a stranger can walk into a gas station shaking, and an old man can tell immediately where he's been. That's not an animal that wandered through. That's something permanent. Something with a history that predates everyone currently alive who knows about it. I haven't gone back. I don't think I will. My grandfather built a cabin on 40 acres in the hills of western North Carolina sometime in the early 60s. He built it himself, which was the kind of thing men in that part of the world did then. And he lived in it part of the year until he got too old to manage the road in winter. When he died 3 years ago, he left the property to my father. When my father died last spring, he left it to me. I hadn't been back since I was 14. I grew up about an hour from it and spent summers there as a kid, but I left the state for college and never really came back. The property had been sitting empty for years. I went up in September to figure out what to do with it. 3 days. Clean out what I could, assess what the cabin needed to be sellable, try to get my head around the fact that both of them were gone, and this was what was left. Grief does strange things to logistics. The cabin was smaller than I remembered, the way everything from childhood is smaller. The path to the creek had been swallowed by 20 years of growth, but the structure was sound. My grandfather built things to last. I got the generator running, cleared enough to sleep, settled in. First 2 days were fine. I worked days and slept hard. The land was quiet in the way mountain land is quiet. Full of sound, just none of it human. Birds, wind in the canopy, the creek below. I slept better than I had since before my father's diagnosis. The third night, something woke me up at around 2 a.m. Not a sound exactly, an absence of sound. The whole mountain going quiet at once, the way it does sometimes. And then into that silence, something moving through the brush on the north side of the cabin. Heavy, slow, taking its time. Whatever it wasn't passing through. I lay still and listened. The movement tracked along the north wall, turned at the back corner, continued down the south side. I could hear the brush parting and settling with each step. I got up and went to the back window. I couldn't see much. The moon wasn't up. Just starlight through the canopy, the brush moving in a line 30 feet from the cabin wall. And I could hear breathing. Not the quick, shallow breath of an excited animal. Slow and even and deliberate, like something that was in no hurry whatsoever. I stood at that window for 20 minutes and watched the line of disturbed brush work its way around the building. Then it stopped. The brush went still. The breathing stopped. The mountain came back to life. Insects, a distant owl, the creek. I didn't sleep again. In the morning, I walked the perimeter. The brush along the north and back walls was disturbed. Stems bent, a few small saplings pushed flat, but the leaf cover was too thick for clean prints. Along the east wall, where the sound had stopped, I found a patch of ground roughly 3 feet wide where the leaves had been scraped back to bare soil. Not by wind, deliberately. And in the exposed soil, 2 parallel lines pressed in, each about 4 feet long, running alongside the cabin wall, like something had crouched and set its weight down on 2 long, narrow points. Not feet, not hands, something I had no framework for. I took photographs. I've shown them to people since. Nobody has been able to tell me what made them. What I keep coming back to is something my grandfather said to me when I was 9 or 10 years old. We were sitting on the porch one evening and he said, "Once, in a voice that wasn't telling a story, just stating a fact, that the north side of the property was where you didn't go after dark. I asked him why. He said, because something lives up in those hills and it comes down at night, and you don't want to be between it and the cabin when it does. I asked what it was. He shook his head, said he didn't know and didn't want to know, said his father had told him the same thing, and his father before that. I sold the property 2 months after that trip. I didn't tell the buyers about the third night. I didn't mention the cleared ground or the impressions in the soil. I didn't repeat what my grandfather told me on the porch when I was 9. I think about those buyers sometimes. I hope they stay inside after dark. I hope they don't go looking along the north wall for whatever it is that comes down from the hills. Most of all, I hope they never hear what I heard that night. Something large and patient and completely unhurried, walking the perimeter of a cabin it is apparently known about for a very long time.